There is a mountain in the middle of nowhere. No roads lead to it, no maps mark it. The wind here smells like dust and hot stone, the kind of silence so complete you can hear your own pulse in your ears. And on this particular afternoon, an old man is walking up its slope with a flock of sheep that are not even his. His name is Moses. He is 80 years old. He has been hiding in this desert for 40 years. He killed a man in Egypt and ran before anyone could catch him. Back in Egypt, an entire nation of his own people is still groaning under slavery, making bricks under the whip of men who do not even know his name anymore. He is nobody now, a shepherd, a foreigner, a failure with sand in his sandals and a past he cannot outrun. And then he sees it, a bush burning, except it isn't burning away. The fire climbs through the branches and never consumes them. No smoke drifting off into ash, no collapse, just fire sitting inside wood refusing to finish the job fire is supposed to do. You would stop too, anyone would stop, so Moses stops and he steps closer, and the ground beneath his sandals becomes, without warning, the holiest ground he has ever stood on in his life. A voice comes from inside the fire. It tells him to take off his sandals. It tells him this dirt, this ordinary patch of nowhere desert is holy now, simply because God is standing on it. And Moses asks the question that every desperate person has asked since the beginning of time. Not what should I do? Not how do I fix this, he asks simply, who are you? The answer that comes back out of the fire is 4 letters. In Hebrew, they are written without vowels, almost too sacred to pronounce. Yod, He, Vav, He. For thousands of years afterward, Jewish scribes copying scripture by hand would reach this name and stop. They would set down their pen. They would wash their hands. And then, and only then, would they write it again. Because to write the name of God carelessly was unthinkable. That smallest letter, the Yod, sits at the front of that name like a single spark. Stay with me, because by the end of this video you will see exactly where that spark was finally allowed to catch fire in a way no one expected, and what it cost for God to let his name be spoken out loud over the worst night in human history. But we are not there yet. Here is what you need to understand first. This is not a list of titles. This is not a vocabulary lesson you memorize and forget. This is not a name tag God wears so we can address him properly in prayer. This is a record of every single time the God of the universe looked at one terrified, broken, exhausted human being and told them exactly who he needed to be for them, in that exact moment. Not a title chosen by a committee of priests, not a name decided in a council somewhere centuries later. A name handed directly to the person standing in the wreckage, because that person needed it before anyone else did. Hagar needed him to see her, Abraham needed him to provide, Gideon needed him to bring peace, David needed him to shepherd, Jeremiah needed him to be righteous when nothing else was. An unborn child would later carry all these names. You are about to meet all of them. And by the time we reach the end, you will know which one of these names you need to call out today, in your own kitchen, your own car, your own sleepless 3 in the morning. Let's start in a desert, not this one, a different one, with a woman nobody was looking for. Picture a woman walking alone into open desert, with nothing but a skin of water and a belly swollen with a child she never asked to carry. Her name is Hagar. She is Egyptian, a servant in the household of Abraham and his wife Sarah, and she has just been cast out into the wilderness of Shur because Sarah could no longer stand the sight of her. No husband walking beside her, no family waiting for her, no one in the entire world who knows where she is or whether she is alive. You know that feeling, even if your wilderness looked different. The feeling of being so unseen that you start to wonder if you actually exist, if anyone would notice, if anyone would even ask. And then, sitting by a spring of water in the middle of nowhere, an angel of the Lord finds her. Not Sarah, not Abraham, not anyone with status or standing. God himself comes looking for the Egyptian servant girl that everyone else had already decided to forget, and Hagar gives him a name. Not a name she invented out of nowhere, a name she discovered, because of what he had just done. She calls him El Roi, the God who sees. In Hebrew, the word Roi comes from the verb to see. But it means more than glancing at someone in passing. It means being truly looked at, examined, known. The kind of seeing that says, I noticed you when no one else did. And it was not only her sorrow he saw. The same angel told her she would carry a son named Ishmael, and that this son would become the father of a multitude too large to count. A woman with no family was just handed a future bigger than the house that cast her out. The God who sees did not just notice her pain. He saw a whole future inside her that nobody else had bothered to imagine. Here's what most people miss about this story. Hagar is the only person who gives God this specific name. Not Abraham, not Moses, not David. A nameless servant girl cast into a desert gets credit for naming an attribute of God that every other prophet missed. He does not wait for important people to notice him first. He goes looking for the ones nobody else is looking for. Hold that thought, because the next name comes from the opposite direction. Not a woman who felt invisible, a father who felt like he was about to lose everything. Decades later, on a different mountain, Abraham is climbing with his son Isaac beside him. Isaac is carrying the wood. Abraham is carrying the fire and the knife, and Isaac does not yet know that he is the offering. You can imagine the silence between them on that climb. 3 days of walking already behind them. 3 days for Abraham to change his mind, and he never did. God had asked him to sacrifice the son born to him in his old age. This was the son the entire promise of his future rested on, and Abraham kept walking anyway. Partway up that mountain, Isaac asks his father a question that should stop every reader cold. He has noticed the wood, the fire, the knife, and he has noticed what is missing. Where is the lamb for the offering? Abraham's answer is the kind of sentence that only makes sense in hindsight. God will provide himself a lamb. He did not know yet how true those words would turn out to be, in more ways than one. At the top of the mountain, Abraham builds the altar. He ties his son's hands. He raises the knife. And that is the exact moment a voice stops him. Not before. Not earlier, to spare him the walk, the rope, the terror in his son's eyes. The voice comes at the last possible second, after Abraham has already proven his heart. He proved he would hold nothing back from God, and there, caught in a thicket, is a ram, provided. Already there before Abraham ever needed it, just waiting for the moment he would need it most. Abraham names that place. He calls it Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord will provide. The Hebrew word jireh comes from the verb to see, the same root as Hagar's name for God, but here it carries the sense of seeing ahead of time, providing before the need is even spoken. The ram wasn't sent the moment Abraham cried out. It was already there. God had seen the moment coming before Abraham had even left home. This is not a coincidence or a backstory detail. This is not a footnote in an old story about an old man on an old mountain. This is the pattern that runs underneath every name in this video. God does not show up empty-handed at the last second out of luck. He shows up exactly on time because he was never late to begin with. And there's one more thing worth sitting with before we move forward. The mountain Abraham stood on that day is widely believed to be a very special ground. Jewish tradition says this region of Moriah is where the city of Jerusalem would eventually rise. The place where a father almost lost his only son became, in time, the place where God did not stop the knife from falling on his own. But we are getting ahead of the story. Back at the burning bush after Moses asks his question, the voice gives him an answer that sounds almost too simple to satisfy anyone. I am who I am. In Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Not a description of one trait, not a job title. A declaration of pure existence, the God who simply is, who was never born, who will never die, who depends on nothing and no one to keep existing. Here's what nobody tells you. Every other name in this video, provider, shepherd, peace, righteousness, is God answering the question, what do I need from you right now? But YHWH, the name behind all of them, answers a different question entirely. It answers, who are you when I need nothing at all? It is the root every other name grows out of. Before God could be your provider, he had to simply be. Before he could be your peace, he had to exist outside of all conflict. The Jewish historian Josephus described just how seriously this name was guarded. The priests who handled it in the temple did not casually toss it around in conversation. They treated 4 letters with absolute caution. They handled it like fire itself, because in a sense, that is exactly what they were handling. A name spoken out of an actual flame, on an actual mountain, to an actual fugitive who had nothing left to offer except his attention. You are going to see that root again. And this is where it gets remarkable, because it resurfaces in a way that will change how you read the rest of this video. For now, 3 names are on the table: the God who sees. The Lord will provide. I am Dupcho I am. A servant girl, a grieving father, and a fugitive shepherd, each one handed a name they did not invent. It was a name they discovered when God showed them exactly who he was willing to be. He met them in their exact moment of need. Notice the pattern forming here. Not one of these names showed up in a quiet, comfortable moment. They showed up in a wilderness, on top of a mountain with a knife already raised, in front of a fire that should have died out and didn't. That is not how name tags get written. That is how rescues happen, and we are only halfway through. You already know which name you have needed at some point in your life. Maybe you needed him to see you. Maybe you needed him to provide at the last second. Maybe you have never put a name to it at all, and you have just been calling it luck, or coincidence, or a good week after a long string of bad ones? Type that name in the comments before you forget it. By the end of this video, there is one more name coming that gathers up every single one of these into a single child. If this kind of study means something to you, subscribe now. There are more of these names still ahead. The next one comes from a man hiding in a winepress, too afraid to even believe the message God was sending him. A man is beating wheat in secret, hiding from Midianite raiders. If they see him out in the open, they will take everything he has, the way they have taken everything from his neighbors for 7 straight years. His name is Gideon. He is not a soldier. He is not a natural-born leader. He is, by his own description, the least important son in the least important family in his entire tribe. 7 years of raids have left his people stripping their own harvest in secret, hiding food in caves. They hide food the way you might hide something you are ashamed of, and an angel of the Lord sits down under a tree near him and tells him that he is about to deliver all of Israel from the hand of Midian. Gideon's response is not faith, it is panic. He builds an altar on the spot, terrified that seeing God face to face means he is about to die, the way ancient people genuinely believed it would. In that exact threshing floor where a frightened farmer is convinced his life is over, a voice tells him, "Peace be unto you, you shall not die." Gideon names that altar Jehovah-Shalom, the Lord is peace. But there's a detail most people skip right past when it comes to that word shalom. It does not just mean the absence of conflict, it means wholeness, completeness, everything fitted back together the way it was always supposed to be. Gideon was not just told calm down. He was told that the broken pieces of his own courage and his family's reputation were about to be put back together by the same God who had just shown up uninvited in his backyard. You shall not die. That is what peace sounded like the first time anyone in Scripture called God by that name, not the absence of a problem. The presence of God standing in the middle of the problem, telling you that you will live. That peace did not stay locked inside one frightened man's chest. Not long after, God told Gideon to send home every soldier he could spare. An army of 32,000 men quickly shrank down to a mere 300. 300 men stood against a Midianite camp, so vast it is described as covering a valley floor like locusts. By every military calculation available, that battle should have been a complete slaughter. Instead, it became proof. It proved that the peace given on that threshing floor was never about Gideon's own strength holding steady. It was about whose strength was actually doing the holding. Now watch what happens next, because the stakes will climb. They are about to climb from one frightened farmer to an entire nation. A boy named David grows up watching sheep on hillsides outside Bethlehem. Long before he is a king, long before he kills a giant with a sling, he is a shepherd. He is learning every single thing a flock teaches a person who is paying attention. That sheep wander without someone to lead them. That sheep cannot defend themselves against wolves. That sheep, left alone for a night, will die. They will die of things a shepherd could have prevented with nothing more than presence. In the valley of Elah, the same shepherd skills he sharpened protecting lambs from lions are the only training he brings against Goliath. This 9-foot Philistine soldier is armored head to foot, while David carries nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones. No one in either army expects the shepherd boy to walk away alive, but you already know how that story ends. The same God who taught him to fight off wolves in the dark had been training him the entire time for a giant in the daylight. Years later, after he has been anointed king and killed Goliath, David becomes a fugitive on the run. He is hiding in caves from his own father-in-law, King Saul, who wants him dead out of jealousy. And it is in that season, hunted and exhausted, that David writes the words that have outlived every other piece of ancient literature. He writes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Jehovah-Raah, the Lord my shepherd." This is not a poem written by a king sitting comfortably on a throne. This is a man on the run, sleeping in caves, dreaming of green pastures. He writes about still waters because he desperately needed to remember what it felt like to be led by someone who actually knew where the water was. He could not see the path ahead of him most days. He could only remember his sheep. From his years on those hillsides, he knew that sheep who trust their shepherd do not need to see the whole path. They only need to hear the voice that is calling them forward. You shall not want. Not you will never face a wolf. Not you will never walk through a dark valley. David writes about the valley of the shadow of death, directly by name, in the very same psalm. The promise was never the absence of danger. The promise was the shepherd's presence. It is the presence of a shepherd who walks into the valley with you instead of sending you in alone. Pay attention to this, because the stakes are about to climb past one man and onto an entire collapsing nation. Centuries after David, a prophet named Jeremiah stands on the walls of Jerusalem and watches the city he loves come apart. Babylonian armies surround it. Famine spreads inside it. The temple of God is about to be burned to the ground. Jeremiah has spent his entire ministry warning the people this was coming, and not one person listened. Now he is watching it happen exactly the way he said it would, and it brings him no satisfaction at all. It brings him only grief. He is later remembered as the weeping prophet, and on the night the walls finally fell, he had every reason to weep. Mothers searching for bread that no longer existed. Soldiers deserting posts they knew could not be held anymore. A king fleeing through a gap in the wall, only to be captured before he ever got clear of the city he had failed to save. And in the middle of that grief, God gives Jeremiah a promise of a different kind of king still to come. He is standing in the middle of a nation whose kings have failed it, whose priests have corrupted it, whose own righteousness has completely collapsed. God promises a king who will be called Jehovah-Tzidkenu, the Lord our righteousness. Here's something worth sitting with about that name. Every king Israel had ever crowned had eventually failed the people in some way. Even David, even Solomon. Their righteousness was never strong enough to hold up the entire nation. So God promises something no human king had ever managed to deliver. He promises a righteousness that does not come from the throne, but from God himself. It is worn like a robe over a people who could not produce 1 ounce of it. Jeremiah did not live to see that promise fulfilled. He died still grieving a city that was already rubble. But he wrote the promise down anyway, because some names are worth recording, even when you will never live long enough to see it. This is not a story about a number of names you can recite. This is not a story about ancient Hebrew you can impress people with at a dinner party. This is not a story about a list to memorize for a Sunday morning Bible study quiz. This is a story about a God who kept handing out exactly the rescue each specific moment required. He gave peace to a frightened farmer, presence to a hunted shepherd king, and righteousness to a grieving prophet watching everything burn. And every single one of those rescues was pointing toward one final name. One that was about to be given, not to an adult standing on a mountain or hiding in a cave, but to a child who had not even been born yet. A miraculous delivery, not delivered through fire this time, not through a ram caught in a thicket or 300 men against a valley full of enemies. Delivered through a young woman's body, in the most ordinary way a name has ever entered the world. A prophet named Isaiah is standing in the royal court of Judah during one of the most dangerous military seasons his nation has ever faced. The Assyrian Empire is the most violent superpower on earth, and it is marching toward them. It is an empire whose own monuments boast of stacking the skulls of conquered cities outside their gates as a warning to the next city in line. It is moving steadily toward Jerusalem, and every king who tried to stop it has been crushed. The people are afraid. The kings are making desperate, faithless alliances. And in the middle of all of that fear, Isaiah does something no prophet before him had ever done. He gives a name, not to a place, not to an ancient altar. He gives a name to a child who has not been born yet. Unto us a child is born, Isaiah says, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God. He is the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Stop and listen to what just happened there. Wonderful Counselor. The same wisdom Moses needed when he stood barefoot in front of a burning bush. Mighty God, the power behind YHH. Everlasting Father. The same shepherding presence David wrote about from inside a cave. Prince of Peace. The exact same word, Shalom, that calmed Gideon on a terrified threshing floor centuries earlier. All of these names connect. Even the seeing that Hagar named in the wilderness, and the providing that Abraham named on the mountain are folded somewhere inside that list. A counselor who is wonderful sees exactly what you need before you even have to ask for it. But there's a layer underneath that. Isaiah was not inventing a new name out of nowhere. He was gathering up every single name God had already revealed across centuries of desperate people, and fold all of them into one child. But it gets stranger. Remember the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the Yod. The letter at the front of the unspeakable name, the one ancient scribes feared to write carelessly, the one Moses heard from inside a burning bush. For generation after generation, the Jewish people would not even pronounce that name out loud. It was too holy, too dangerous, too far above human lips to risk saying it wrong. And then, centuries after Isaiah gave his great prophecy, A teenage girl in Nazareth gives birth to a son, and an angel tells both her and her husband exactly what to call him, not YHWH. Not a name too sacred to speak. A name a mother could whisper over a manger without fear of saying it wrong. Yeshua, Jesus. In Hebrew, the name itself means the Lord saves. The unspeakable name had finally become speakable, because it had finally become a person you could hold. A name the shepherds outside Bethlehem could shout in the dark. A name a frightened carpenter could whisper over a feeding trough doubling as a crib. A name that did not require a temple, a priesthood, or years of training to pronounce correctly. That is what that small letter was waiting to become. That single spark planted in front of a burning bush was waiting to become this the entire time. Not a word too holy to say out loud. A name a frightened mother could say every single day for the rest of her life. It changes everything. This is not a story about a number. This is not a story about ancient grammar. This is not a story about religious vocabulary passed down for thousands of years for no reason. This is a story about every single name collapsing into one. It is about God giving himself entirely into one child, born in poverty, in a season of national fear, exactly the same way every other name in this video was born. You know what that feels like, even if you haven't used these terms. Think about the last time someone you loved was afraid in the middle of the night. A child, maybe. Frightened by something in the dark, or by a nightmare they cannot explain, asking you in a small voice, "What's wrong with me?" You did not hand them an explanation. You did not give them a lecture on neuroscience or fear responses. You said their name. You stayed in the room. You let your presence say what no amount of information could ever say nearly as fast. Notice what you did not do in that moment. You did not recite a list of facts about fear and how the brain processes it. You did not hand your child a pamphlet. You sat on the edge of the bed. You said their name, low and completely steady. You said it again and again, until their breathing slowed down to match your own. That is not weakness. That is the most powerful thing one person can do for another person who is afraid. And it is exactly what these names describe. That is what every single name in this video has been describing about God from the very beginning. That is what he has been doing the entire time. Not handing information to frighten people, showing up, saying a name, and staying. Hagar got seen, Abraham got provided for, Moses got presence itself, Gideon got peace, David got a shepherd, Jeremiah got righteousness he could never produce on his own, and a child born under a death threat got all of these names. They were folded into a body that could finally bleed, finally die, and finally rise again, so that the names were not just spoken over you from a distance anymore. They moved right into the neighborhood. So here is what this means. Takeaway 1. God never reveals a new name to satisfy curiosity. Every single name in Scripture, provider, shepherd, peace, righteousness, the great I Am itself, was given to one specific person in one specific crisis in their life. It was given because that is exactly who God needed to be for them in that moment. He does not hand out theology. He hands out rescue. You will never find a single one of these names recorded in a completely calm, untroubled scene. Every one of them was forged in a wilderness, a war, a famine, or a fire. That is not an accident of history. That is simply how he has always chosen to introduce himself. Takeaway 2. Whatever you are facing already has a name. If you feel unseen the way Hagar did, he is El Roi, the God who sees. If you are still waiting on something you cannot provide for yourself, he is Jehovah-Jireh. If your family has written you off, he is Jehovah-Shalom standing near. If you are hiding in a cave somewhere, hunted and exhausted like David, he is Jehovah-Raah, walking into the valley ahead of you. You are not waiting for a new revelation. You are standing inside one of these ancient stories already. The only thing left to decide is whether you will call out the name that already fits. Takeaway 3, and this is the one I want you to sit with longest. Every name God ever gave himself was always heading toward a body to be held. It was heading toward a name that could finally be whispered instead of feared. A presence that would not just speak peace from a distance, but walk directly into your worst valley and stay there with you. That is what Emmanuel means. God with us, not God watching us, not God informing us, God with us in the room saying your name in the dark. That is the difference between a God who hands down instructions from a mountain and the God who walks down himself. He is the God who walks down the mountain himself to sit beside you in whatever wilderness you are currently standing in. Which one of these names hit you the hardest today? Tell me in the comments because I read every single one. I want to know which desperate moment in your own life this video just walked you back into. If this meant something to you, you know what to do. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. A servant girl in a dusty desert, a father with a knife already raised, a fugitive shepherd barefoot before a fire, a farmer hiding in a winepress, a king hunted in his own caves, a prophet watching his city burn. None of them asked for a massive theology lesson. All of them got exactly the name they needed, the moment they needed it. He saw Hagar. He provided for Abraham. He gave presents to Moses. He gave peace to Gideon. He shepherded David. He was the righteousness Jeremiah could not find. And in the end, he gave himself a name a mother could finally say out loud. Yeshua. The Lord saves. Say it slowly. That is not a syllable from a dead language. That is the answer to every single question this video has asked tonight.